I remember because we had many conversations about this, right? Because even after you purchased that turnkey duplex in St. Catharines, you wanted to do a duplex conversion. That was on your mind, but
Yeah,
you just, you didn't know what needed to happen, what the next steps were, but you're like, you had it in your mind as that was the next step. You wanted to buy, a property in a good neighborhood that you could convert into a duplex, and then when the opportunity arose, you took action, right? And you're like,
right,
you
right.
didn't even have a contractor at that point, right? It was like, okay, it's a
No, I didn't have much of anything at that point, which
yeah,
seems to be the way I do most things. I just
yeah,
kind of jump in. But I think even at that point, you were great because you were able to give me some guidance. Because I thought,
mm,
although I wanted to get into a duplex conversion, we were looking for a certain kind of duplex
yeah,
conversion. It was, we weren't looking at building something from scratch. We were looking for something that had a little bit of a foundation, whether it
mm,
had a kitchen or it already had meters or whatever the case was. But
yep,
we were looking for something that wasn't, and that was partly due just for my time commitments. Just we just didn't have the time and the expertise at that point to look at doing something from right from scratch, building
mm,
from blank canvas, so to speak.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's funny. Both the properties you bought so far already had a kitchen and a bathroom in the basement, right? And it was
Yeah,
more the legalizing, cosmetic updates, making it a little bit nicer, doing some soundproofing, right? Just making it look and feel a bit nicer, as well as the legal components,
the
permits, and
legal
such.
component for sure,
Yeah.
laundry in both units and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's next for you? What are you envisioning your next project to look like?
That's a great question. So it depends on if it's my decision or if it's my wife and I's decision. But like we mentioned before, we're looking to rotate into another investment property, a duplex conversion. Hopefully, I'm kind of got my eye on hopefully looking at something that has, we'll do the duplex conversion, but then down the road, maybe have the opportunity to add a third unit somehow. So whether it's through a coach suite or a property that allows you to split the property, something along those lines, I think will be if we can find it. I know that's probably a pretty, those aren't very common, but I think those are some of the things that we'll be looking for, whether it's in where we are now in Hamilton or whether we are moving to Welland where we've done our
Mm,
last project.
awesome. What words of advice, just because we've discussed the sale of this property, right? What words of advice would you give to someone who's considering doing something similar to you? So selling a rental property, any advice you would give to them?
I think for every person it might be different, but I would just say be clear on the reasons why you're selling.
Mm,
And you know, I always just the way I've seen things happen over the last few years. I wouldn't want someone to be in a position where they get out of the market and then they can't get back in,
mm,
or it's a lot harder to get back in. And I
yeah.
think it's as and as we've seen, like it's getting harder and harder to find those investment properties that make sense in this GTA area. So I think it would just be to have clarity on why you're selling, and just make sure it makes sense for you.
Yeah. I think yeah, that's a really good point, because even when we just before listing the property, when we started to see that, maybe we're not going to get that crazy high sale price because things were changing, it didn't necessarily change our decision to sell, because we weren't necessarily purely trying to time the market or be opportunistic. Sure, there was that component that, we were hoping to get a good sale price, but the decision was more grounded, like you mentioned, in being defensive, right?
Right,
Selling an asset that has a lesser cash flow to buying an asset with a stronger cash flow and a future upside potential, right? So
right.
those principles remain whether the market was super active, whether it was slow, as long as you were making some profit on the sale and you could redeploy it into something that can produce more potential cash flow, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have heard people too, like, oh, now's a great time to sell. Now's a great time. Everybody's got to sell. And I said, well, just be careful because it's like
mm,
you might sell now, and if you're not sure what you're doing with it, you might not be able to get back in if you so choose,
yeah,
or and timing the market is very that's more speculative in my opinion. So
it's one of those things that sounds so simple, right? Yeah, you should know when it's a good time to buy or sell. And being even myself being involved in so many real estate transactions, I can honestly say I can't time the market. I can't know when it's a good time to sell or when it's a good time to buy, right? I've lived by the principle that every time is a good time to buy as long as the deal makes sense. But
True.
in terms of knowing when to sell, sort of the highs and the low, like literally we literally experienced something change, right? Because
Yeah,
we were preparing to sell in January, February with the market reaching ever new heights,
yeah,
and then when we were listing for sale, things had changed. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of long-term investing versus flipping and more short-term strategies, because of exactly this, right? Imagine you bought in January with the hope to sell in March, and then the market turns on you.
trends.
That's
Yeah, and
that's
that's
bad.
a good point because I know I had thought of maybe doing a flip project just as another investment strategy, and but never experiencing how quickly the nuances of the market changing, how
Mm,
subtle it can be, and how quick or how simple. Like all it takes is the rumors of inflation, and boom, that's
yeah,
all it took. Whether that's
yeah,
true or not. And speculation of inflation and interest rates rising that
yeah.
cooled the market off in a matter of weeks.
Honestly,
So
this time I don't know if I can even pinpoint the exact reason, right? Because interest rates came up half a point potentially, and it's, yeah, inflation, like it this time, like before there was the foreign buyers tax, right, in 2017.
yeah,
That was like a clear change, market dropped, right? It just
yeah, for
calmed
sure.
down
Yeah,
altogether. But this time it was more subtle. There wasn't a like a government policy announcement that just changed
for
everything,
sure.
right? It was
Yeah,
um even to this day, I'm still trying to figure it out, honestly. Like but I don't know the reason why, but I can see a little bit more of the outcome where I'm seeing more GTA buyers turn back to the GTA. So we're seeing now in Oakville and Mississauga and Toronto more bidding wars, prices going higher in areas that were otherwise cooler,
right.
right? And we're seeing the markets in Hamilton, Niagara become cooler when they were really hot. So I'm guessing, I'm just extrapolating here, that some of that demand here has shifted back to the GTA, which would make sense. But again, why? Who knows? Maybe there's some positivity about things opening up after the summer. Maybe. Again, it's still a
Yeah,
guess, right?
it
So
is a guess, and that's why what I think it's important to be aware of what's happening in the markets, but I think it's more important to have clarity on what it is you're trying to achieve, and then having a process of trying to achieve
mm,
that goal as best you can. 'Cause,
yeah,
things will always change. Things are always changing and moving, but if I think if you have a clear vision of what you're trying to do, despite the market,
yeah.
um, that's the best way in my opinion, that's the best way to approach your real estate investing.
Well, I think to your credit, the most recent purchase you made, right? The duplex conversion in Welland, you got that under contract January, February, right? Before COVID, if I
We
remember correctly.
Yeah,
Something
no, it
January.
was actually we got it under contract. I think it was maybe well, 2 week, like the first week of March or
Oh,
maybe the
really?
last week of February. Like I remember
Yeah.
us trying to decide whether we go ahead with this because of the pending COVID,
Yeah.
knowing that we had work to do, we needed to rent the place.
Yeah. That
And
was honestly, that was one of the conversations. It's like,
yeah,
would COVID stop our demand from being able to find a tenant who's willing to pay rent, right?
that's right. And then at the time we had a July 1 closing, and I think this
Mm.
was March, the first week of
Yes,
March.
that's right.
And we were like, oh, this will be done. This will be, we'll be fine if it's July. So, and then literally after we got it under contract, I think the next week everything shut down.
Shut down, yeah.
And I was just like, what have we done? And but you know what? We just stuck with it.
Mm,
We knew it was a good property.
yeah.
I knew I had good tradespeople that were going to willing to help me out. That as soon as we were able to get in and do what we needed to do, they would be
Mm,
there. And it worked out fantastic for us actually.
yeah. Well, now you're in the process of getting it refinanced, so I'm super
Yeah,
excited to see what that result is. But for context, you bought this beautiful semi-detached home with a walkout basement, raised bungalow, so big windows in the basement. You bought it for 375,000.
it's about 62,000 with the
Okay.
carrying costs.
Okay. Perfect. So 62,000.
Yeah,
So you're all in, what is it? 440-ish,
yeah,
450, something in that range.
Or yeah,
And we're
38.
hoping that the appraisal comes back in the next little bit here, potentially at the 550 mark, right? That's the goal. And there
That's the
are
goal.
quite a few comparable sales at that
Yeah.
price point. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm super positive that it will come back something in that range. Something.
Yeah, we're hopeful. We're very hopeful that it does. That'll give us the opportunity to pull out all our money invested and just leave a freestanding asset, which
Yeah.
is kind of one of our goals now, is to see how
Mm,
many, freestanding assets can we create in our portfolio.
yeah.
So that's what we'll
Now,
start kind of.
I guess that is the burst strategy in a nutshell.
Yeah,
But the one caveat I want to put out there to anyone watching is that you didn't know you would be able to get anything close to this kind of result when you purchased the property. You just knew that it was a good property, good neighborhood, and you could get good rents for it, right?
right. And I think in the back of my mind was we would refinance it, but we just didn't expect to be able to do it so soon, right? We thought the
Yes.
refinancing might be 3 years from now
Yeah.
or whatever the case may be, right? So, the one thing I'm taking out of this is like, okay, this, I don't know if this is a unicorn. I don't know if this is a once in, but I'm not, my mindset going into this is that, I'm not going in thinking I can refinance and pull it out immediately. It might be a year or two, or maybe even
Yeah.
3 years before you can refinance to pull out your money.
Yeah, I think reasonably you should be able to pull out your renovation cost, because if you go to get an appraisal, even if the market has done nothing, you can show that, hey, here's an invoice. I spent this much in this property, so it has to at least be worth that much more than my purchase
Right.
price, right?
Right.
It's when it comes to getting an appraised value more than that, where you're able to pull out your down payment, that's where, if you're buying in the nicer neighborhoods, you're paying the market price at the time of purchase, it's tough. There's going to be no comparables to
Right.
justify you pulling everything out at the time of purchase. But what we've seen over the last few years is that by the time you go to refi, if the market's moved at all, then potentially your comparables show up afterwards, right? So,
Right. Well, I think that was even the concern, if I remember our conversations when we were talking about, like, during the project.
mm,
We mentioned that there weren't any necessarily any comparables to compare against at that
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So, as we were going through the project, my thought process was more along, okay, if we choose to refinance when the project is completed, as long as we can get the renovation cost back,
yeah,
I'll be good with that.
yeah,
Or do we just wait and, refinance it at a later date with the hopes of getting more of our money out? So at that time, I was like, you know what, let's just get the project done, and I'll connect with yourself and my mortgage broker and some other people to get some advice on how to proceed. But, lucky for me, I guess, the opportunity presented itself to refinance now.